When I talked at Boston Ruby Group, it was about 25 minutes, so this is an improvement. Anyway, I'm here today to talk to you about pragmatic community-driven development in Ruby. And I have 86 slides to go through in about 35 minutes. Now, the real title of this talk is Rolling the Dice with Report. And Report is a reporting software package for Ruby. But I know that reporting sucks, so I decided not to use that as a title. Actually, the biggest thing that makes that a good thing is that Report is something that could not have existed without a community. It's something where it was just too much work when we started it to be able to do it alone. So it works as an excellent case study for some of the experiences that might be able to help people in similar situations. One of the biggest things that I want to do here is I want you to think about some of these things and start a discussion. Ruby is at a stage now where we're rapidly growing. Our identity is changing. And it's up to us to define what that is. So these issues such as how to build a community, how to work within that community, I think are really important. And if you take anything out of this talk, I would say to get your voice out there. Think about these issues and help define this community. So this is just a random channel that I thought might work on Freenode. And if you want to kind of make angry comments or happy comments or whatever on IRC while I'm talking, and you have net, you're welcome to do that. And I'd be really excited to see the backlog on that. So one of the good questions to start with is, why are we here? Is it because we love Ruby? Maybe. Maybe we need Ruby for something. Maybe we just don't really know why we're here and we just decided it might be fun. But the reality is this is a community. And the thing that makes this a community is that we have a group of people here with a common set of problems that we want to solve. And that means that we can focus together and we can work on our problems together. Now, what kind of problems are we dealing with? Ideological problems? Now, you either get this joke or you don't, basically. Basically what happened is some people had a dispute, it was mostly the Debian group, over whether or not it was okay for the Firefox logo to be considered non-free. Now, that's all well and good for ideology, but it's definitely not pragmatic. What we're really talking about here is focusing directly on our problems with our software. And our goal is to make good software. And I believe that the best way to do that in a growing community is to leverage the community, leverage the fact that we have people with common interests and needs. Now, why is that important? Well, basically, if you've got some bad ideas floating around and you've got some bad implementations and you never share them with anyone, you're pretty much guaranteed to stay bad. And to take a sort of play on the idea of with enough eyes, all bugs are shallow, well, it goes for ideas too. And this talk is full of some bad ideas. But we have a lot of eyes too. And I figured I could take an example of a project that, has an excellent community around it. There's at least a few in Ruby now, and maybe I could analyze that. But I was kind of afraid of that whole thing where it's okay to make fun of your own mother, but it's not okay to make fun of your friend's mother kind of thing. So we're talking about the last 20 months and all the bad ideas that I've had with Report and some of the things that we've gone through. Of course, if this was all about that, we wouldn't have a talk. So there's a few good ideas thrown in there. Now, this is a loaded word for everyone. And the truth of the matter is, while Report was originally developed, it wasn't meant to be used by a community. It was shared with one other person, which is James Edward Gray II, and we were just kind of competing to see who can come up with a better mini reporting framework to do a couple little jobs. And the original code, because I didn't plan to release it, was under the GPL. Coming from the Perl community and only ever working on Ruby software with maybe some other people where I didn't have control over the licenses, my first choice was the GPL. I didn't realize the effects of that. But you know what? When you want to start a project and you think, okay, we're really going to need to have community input, we can't just kind of pick whatever sounds good to us and then just kind of go with that. You do need to start thinking about license choices pretty immediately, because something like a license is very tough to change depending on what license you choose later on down the line. It's not like a method you refactor. You can get into rather serious issues. But what I want to propose here is that when it comes in terms of building a software community and doing it in a pragmatic way, ideology does not have a place. Ideology is an individual decision. It's your own opinions, and it does have a place in what you choose to participate in. But it doesn't necessarily affect the quality of your software. And the real question you have to ask is, what's right for your project? If your goal for your project is to support free software in general, and you want to set an example for that, maybe the GPL is right for you. But if you're looking to get a large community together of people with possibly different interests and needs, then you have to consider that. One of the common options that a lot of people tend to like in the Ruby community is the BSD and MIT licenses. And these are simple, permissive licenses, and on the surface, they look like a very good choice. Of course, every once in a while, you see a flame war coming up about what happens if somewhere down the line the code gets stolen and hidden in a little program and makes it somehow GPL incompatible. And those kind of issues, you don't want to shut someone out just based on their beliefs. So some people decide they want to write their own licenses. And I've never seen a self-written license that I liked, to be honest. And it's also, we have enough software licenses. The OSI and the Free Software Foundation have both approved in excess of 20 licenses as official free software and official open source. In order for your project to be taken seriously, say at a corporate level or at a community level, you pretty much need to use one of those licenses, and the process is painful to get them approved. So really with licensing, it's a matter of compromise. Once you set out to decide what you're going to do with your software, you need to find a way to best accommodate your potential users, your potential contributors, and your developers. What we have to remember is that the core of this, that free software is a gift. If it wasn't, you wouldn't be producing it. It doesn't mean that there's not other interests in it, but ultimately you are handing out code under a license so that developers and users can get some pretty good access to your actual software. And I saw something really interesting in the last flame war that was going on Ruby Talk. And I'll have to look up who actually said this, but they said that the BSD and MIT licenses favor individuals, but that the GPL favors the community at large. Now, I think that's a fairly okay way to describe it, and this is why I think that the license of Ruby is even clearer as a good choice for your software. It basically says that your software is guaranteed to be GPL compatible, and then if you choose to use it in a proprietary environment or in an issue where you would have GPL conflicts, you can do that. And dual licensing is confusing, but when we use something that the language itself is licensed under, we're pretty safe in our license choices. And for me, when I thought about it in the context of Report, we had this long discussion. I was part of one of the great flame wars on the GPL on Ruby Talk. But we thought about it and we said reporting is a big domain, and especially a domain where we're going to run into some sticky issues. There's no way that we can possibly build a piece of reporting software and have it really grow to where it should be without being able to sometimes integrate with software that we can't control the licensing terms on. And I didn't want to shut out my fellow hackers just because they have to deal with some software that is under licensing terms that aren't ideal. So that was our least common denominator. We decided to use the license of Ruby, and you see this more and more. And I think it's really a good idea. The Perl community recommends this kind of thing as well. And I mean, what you're doing is you're basically saying, okay, we're using a license that may not be our favorite, but it's good enough. And that tends to encourage users to all participate regardless of their ideologies. So sometimes RubyTalk does save the day. And this is a good decision because I could tell you that if I went under the GPL, that I would be having issues in my work with what I'm doing with the software right now. And that makes me glad that we went the way that we did. And as soon as we got through this mess, we immediately started to get together this tiny little community around the software, doing fairly regular releases, talking about things. And I never really took it seriously. But then I realized that we did have some sort of community when the names came along. So we had all of these, and these were coming up in mailing list posts, occasional blogs, and things like that. And I hate all of these names. But, you know, the thing is, people were talking about our software, and that's a start. And the thing that you can gain most from a community is ideas. And you can see just from the diverse topics that come across RubyTalk for anyone who reads it, that there is a lot of really solid information out there, and there's a lot of really smart people out there that are willing to help you. However, the RubyTalk effect can get overwhelming. And based on their input, I had a lot of feature requests, and we decided we were going to put together a little sprint. And these were the feature requests when I put them all together. And I said I was going to do it in 4 weeks, part-time. That didn't happen. But it's really tempting. As soon as people are like, wow, this is really cool, it only needs this. When you're someone who is working on a project on your own, released it a couple times, you get so excited by that, at least I did, that I was like, gee, if I can only do this one little thing, it's not going to take long. I can make that user happy, and maybe they'll contribute something back. But the reality is, I don't know I've never used Object Graph. I've never used Lefkatio. I don't even have a feed reader. And all of these things make me a bad person to be working on that kind of stuff. I could have implemented all of that, and I did. I implemented like partial little things for all of it, and it turned out terrible. So I really feel like you need to focus on what you're good at, what you are working on, and what you actually have a problem with. And the best thing to do is, if you want to develop a community around that, is learn when to say no, and also find some people who have similar problems to you and, you know, can more focus on what you actually need to get done. So RubyTalk was great for discussion, but as the interest got more and more, it started to get really difficult to kind of implement those design decisions and decisions of what should and shouldn't go into the software, because the reality is you've got a lot of people out there, and a lot of people may not even be looking for what you're trying to provide, but they're just looking for something, and, you know, it's just really difficult to decide what you're actually going to pursue. And sometimes a smaller, more focused group is what you need. We started a Ruport mailing list in December of 2006, I think. And at first we had, 10 or 20 subscribers on there, and it was great. We would not even get regular posts from people, but it was a way that we could, have a couple core contributors, have a couple core, developers and testers and things like that help us out. And it was also a way that we could start discussions with people that we know for sure are interested in our scope. And it helped us begin to define, our software as something instead of just a big blob of code. And on top of that, it's a lot easier to read tens of emails a week rather than thousands to try and find what you're interested in. And these discussions, they really started to become something more than just discussion. As soon as someone started talking about some features and we started to flesh them out, these became real development. And getting some people to contribute code got us to the point where we were getting bug reports, patches, things like that. And, I mean, it's just really exciting to see a project grow like that. What we learned after a few months is that a mailing list is not a bug tracker. And I was one of the people who was so hard against that idea. I think it was Daniel Berger who's like, I would like to keep track of what's going on in Report, but I have to go through a mailman archive, and it's terrible, and all of this other stuff. And, like, people were even hooking in, like, alternative interfaces. Like, we ended up on Gmain and all of these other things just so that people could search the archives better. And people have recommended GForge, which is the base for Ruby Forge. And it's a fairly comprehensive piece of software. Pretty much everything that you need is there. But is it really what you need when you're developing a Ruby project? In our case, it wasn't. We needed track. And this was a tough decision for us because we were at the point where we had, a few regular users, one or two contributors, and we were at the point where we had enough information where we needed something, to manage it better, but we didn't have enough where we could safely say that we could just alien ourselves from Ruby Forge. But the reality here was that Subversion and Track, when you put them together, gives you this great integrated system where someone who's a casual user or someone who hasn't even signed up on your mailing list can subscribe to an RSS feed and get full change sets for your code, all of the tickets, notification, updates of everything that's going on your wiki, all of this other stuff that, I think it makes it a lot easier for contributors because it starts to blur the lines a bit. Someone can just sit in an RSS feed reader and when they have a few minutes, see what's going on with our project, rather than digging through the morass that is Ruby Forge. But we needed to keep it. The biggest thing that Ruby Forge can do for you are two things. One, get you hooked into the gem server with no obstacles to go through. And two, give you exposure. Virtually all interesting Ruby software is on Ruby Forge. And one of our biggest concerns was at the time when they had, subversion activity statistics running actively, is that if our subversion died out, people might think it's a dead project, especially if we didn't release regularly. But sometimes you just have to take a sort of shortcut. And basically, this single command here using SVK allowed us to mirror our Subversion repository with our track over to Ruby Forge so that the users over there didn't even need to know that the actual other repository existed. And this maintained the exposure factor while still providing us a really good tool. And the thing is, tools do matter. When you get to a point where you have users that would contribute to your software, but they have to jump through hoops that are really annoying, it begins to affect the quality of your project. So if you can find creative ways to use the tools that you want to use, and especially if it's something where a few of your users say, gee, it would be really cool if we had such and such tool for the software, and you look at it and you get really excited about it too, it makes a big difference. I think that moving, this sounds silly, and you could pick any other project management software and replace it, but one of the biggest changes in Ruport's contributions was moving to Track. And it's amazing how much tools will affect the health of your project. That having been said, Track is in Python, and if anyone wants to write a really good Ruby replacement for it, that would be really cool. What's that? Summer of Code is coming. That's a good idea. So I really did see a direct effect on the amount of friction, being related to the amount of contributions. And previously, when we were doing all of our discussion on Ruby Talk, to the point where we were like, what do you guys think of this method here? And it wouldn't even be like a publicly accessible method, but like something we were doing like internally in the code. And then that's all good and well if we were looking for technical discussions, but we were looking for like API decisions, and you don't want to do that on Ruby Talk. Asking 10,000 people what they think of a method is asking for trouble. But the thing is, after we started to get a lot of contributions, we got to the point where we had to make the hard decision of what we were looking for and what we weren't looking for. And we started to get in patches. This is another sign of a community growing. I went from the point of accepting anything that got sent to me. If you wrote something in Java and then I could port it to Ruby, I would accept it. But you get to the point where you get patches and you go, gee, this is really outside of our scope. But, every patch that you get is valuable. And I tend to look at patches as sort of a relationship between you and a user or contributor. And even if that patch isn't suitable for your software itself, you can use it for examples sometimes. You can make add-ons if you have a plugin system out of those kind of things, if it's something that would be useful but just not directly in your core software. But the best thing that you could do is you can get refinements out of it. Seeing someone trying to add something to your software or change something in your software gives you an idea of the user's experience using your code. And we've got a lot of refactoring, found a lot of bugs and things like that just from patches that we didn't want from people. And I think a lot of people will see these patches at some point and say, okay, that's not what we want, and then basically respond that way and, one, upset the user, and two, overlook some of the good qualities that you could get out of a patch, whether or not it's relevant to your software. Of course, we still do want relevant patches, especially now that things are moving on. And when you get to the point where the software is starting to solidify, you want some solid patches and things like that from users so that they can help you along. But the question that we were kind of asking ourselves for a long time is, what exactly is relevant to our software? And it took us about 15 months to figure that out, which is probably way too long. What really made a difference is that we finally sat down maybe December of last year, and we made this stupid-looking roadmap. And we accompanied it with a bunch of text, which you can find on our wiki. And we kind of said, okay, these are the most important things to us. So we had primary feature work. These are the things that this software will not be very useful in our work without it. And then we had secondary feature work. That's a great place for contributors to start patching. And then we had user-contributed requests. So that was kind of things that we would just have sitting around until someone kind of made a case for them. And this really changed the course of the development. Telling yourself what your software is helps you build it. It's important not to do that too early before you have some experiences. But as soon as you feel like you have somewhat of a vision, it's important to have that. And the scope definition really does help. The thing is, it's not just features that need to be scoped. You need to have some design goals too. And having a community really helps for this. Our use cases are what define our APIs. Basically, the way that a cycle on Ruport works is I go into my work and I build an application or I build a report. And then I take the things that annoyed me about it and then fill a bunch of tickets into our track. And basically, that seems to work pretty well because then, with a little bit of review, oh no, that's crazy, oh, that's really cool, whatever, it tends to really shape the software. And if you're not using the software, you're not going to develop anything worth using. If you're not using it, how are you going to have users? But we went a little bit farther with this, and we actually invite people to come in and give us super specific code so that we can take a look at it and poke at it. But the thing is, you can't be on cruise control here. You really have to be careful not to introduce things that are really just for you, developer conveniences. And one of the ways that we do that is we go back and forth between what we actually set for goals and what actually works in the software. And we've become pretty, excessive about pushing things out of the core. And we're now able to do that because we have a plugin system. So a lot of those things really live better that way. I get really tired of maintaining something like, I had this invoice generation thing that I hacked for work, and I put it into Ruport for a while because it was convenient. And actually, one of our contributors wrote a lot of the code for that. But it got to the point where everyone was like, can you move this box here and do this there? And that's really not the scope of our project. So moving it out into a plugin helped a lot because now, it can kind of live outside of the core and we can more freely have those kind of fringe discussions. So it's important just to kind of look at your stuff and separate the essential from the non-essential. If the only time you ever use it is in a script for work, then you probably have introduced something that is too specific if you're building a general tool. But one of the things that you should aspire for, and we've been aspiring for, is to find a unique project identity. One of the things with Ruport is it's very difficult to do that. Building a community around possibly one of the most boring domains in software development isn't easy. So we use a lot of crazy ideas, and that's the feel for Ruport. Basically, I throw out more ideas than I ever expect to get responded to on the mailing list, and everyone knows that. And people have contacted me off list and said, I don't always respond to these things, but I'm glad you do them. They're nuts, but it's just you guys really keep us in the loop and things like that. And that's what works for us, I guess. We're taking a sort of shotgun approach, and it seems to work. It may not work for your project, but that's our identity with this kind of stuff. We also have this kind of feel that we're not necessarily going to try and copy whatever the most popular projects in Ruby are. A lot of people want Rails-type conveniences for the sake of being Rails-type conveniences, and not because they're actually useful for our software. That having been said, we have some really good ideas from the framework in there, but it took us a while to realize that kind of stuff you have to be really careful about, because the worst thing you could do to a user is kind of halfway implement a good idea from someone else, because it leaves them expecting something that you're not providing. So what I'm really asking here is for people to be bold about their decisions. If you're already working in a community-driven project, don't just assume that you have to do what everyone else does. Take some chances, try and get users, have some crazy ideas. Your developers and your contributors and your users are what make your project, so allow them to have some sort of identity of their own. If you have a project that you have it's an individual project, consider trying to get a community around it and seeing the effects. If you haven't started anything yet, well, we're always looking for people with Ruport. But any project, pick something more fun if you want. Anything would work. So that's pretty much the rest of everything that I wanted to say. I think that this is a limited viewpoint. This is a single project, and you can't take this stuff and apply it directly. But I do hope that sharing these experiences will help you with your decisions as far as developing open source and free software, and trying to make Ruby the best damn community that it can be. But there's one little announcement I want to make, and that's we're finally done making bad ideas, at least for a while. So our first production release of Ruport will be May 15th. So I'm really hoping for questions or thoughts, especially one thing I want to see. I had a few questions I wanted to ask people. How many people here are involved in any sort of free software project? That's awesome. That's really cool. We were getting relatively few amount of tickets filed, a relatively few amount of bug reports, and just lower interaction than we had hoped for, until we wrote this stupid little thing about how to file a bug report and track, how we wanted it formed and things like that, and how to make, how to submit a patch to report, and all of these minor little meta docs. And immediately, within a couple days, I guess people were sitting on the feed reader, saw these wiki pages pop up, read them, and started to submit bug reports, and started working with the trackers, contributing, and things like that. And we don't have a really big community. We probably get 8 or 10 patches a month. We get a few mails a day on the mailing list, things like that. But I mean, it's amazing how little things like that can make a difference, and especially in a small community, that's going to matter to you.
James was hitting on, and what you're hitting on, is that I mean, maybe tools, but if nothing else, like a great contribution to the community would be a set of best practices for dealing with that middle ground.
Does Code for People have a mailing list?
It does. I never check it.
What I've found is you get a couple smart users from your software, and they can answer those basic questions, and also some people get excited by someone else's feature request, and then they'll implement it for them. It doesn't happen all the time, but it's something takes it out of your hands directly.
I guess what I'm driving at is it just seems like even a generic how to bridge developers and users like Ruby Forge would be a great place for documentation on that.
Yeah, I have to. I brought a book with me, which is really an excellent book, and it's available for free online. It's called Producing Open Source Software, and it is kind of what inspired me to submit a proposal for this. And it's amazing because the biggest problem that I see is this is a largely, verbal culture. We spread things by word of mouth. We have this verbal history, and we don't document things because it's kind of just handed down from person to person. And there's really no reason for that because we have all the tools to document our work and things like that and do a lot of the meta documentation. This book takes it's like basically 15 years of hacker culture, good ideas and bad, and it puts it into a readable form.
The book is Producing Open Source Software. It's from O'Reilly by Carl Fogel. Carl is one of the people behind CVS and now SVN, among other things, and is really smart about handling open source communities.
Somebody give us a Ruby URL.
It's just producingoss.com.
If anyone's interested, go on the Ruport list and post to it. If anyone wants to meet up and talk about Ruport, you're welcome to do that. I'd be happy to see you. So anyway, thank you.